Stories never heard before. Arjun on Everest. Arjun had always believed that mountains were more than stone and snow. They were mirrors of the human spirit, reflecting both fragility and strength. Born in a small town in India, he grew up listening to stories of climbers, who dared to touch the sky. For him, Mount Everest was not just the highest peak in the world, it was a symbol of resilience, a place where courage was tested against the rawest forces of nature. His journey to Everest began not with ambition, but with a quiet promise to himself, to discover whether the human heart could endure the weight of the impossible. The expedition began in Kathmandu, where Arjun joined a team of climbers from different corners of the world. Each carried their own reasons for being there. Some sought glory, others redemption, and a few simply chased adventure. Arjun's reason was more intimate. He wanted to prove to himself that recovery from personal loss could be transformed into strength. Years earlier, he had lost his younger brother in a tragic accident, and the grief had carved a hollow inside him. Everest, he believed, could fill that hollow with meaning. It was not about standing on the summit, it was about standing again in life. Kathmandu itself felt like a threshold between worlds. The streets buzzed with life, rickshaws weaving through traffic, incense curling from temple courtyards, monks chanting in low tones. Arjun wandered through the narrow lanes before the expedition began, pausing at shrines where butter lamps flickered. He whispered a prayer not for success, but for courage. In the crowded tea houses, he listened to seasoned climbers speak of avalanches, frostbite, and triumphs. Their words were heavy with both warning and wonder. He realized that Everest was not a place where one went to win, it was a place where one went to learn. Every tale carried the weight of mortality, yet also the shimmer of transcendence. The trek to base camp was itself a pilgrimage. As Arjun walked through villages adorned with prayer flags fluttering in the wind, he felt the whispers of resilience in every stone wall, and every smiling face of the Sherpa people. Children ran alongside the trail, their laughter echoing against the mountains. Old women offered bowls of butter tea, their eyes carrying centuries of quiet endurance. The air grew thinner with each step, but his resolve thickened. At night, under the vast Himalayan sky, he would sit by the fire and write in his journal, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to walk with it." The stars above seemed to nod in agreement, ancient witnesses to countless journeys of hope and despair. At base camp, the mountain revealed its true face, icy ridges, avalanches rumbling in the distance, and winds that seemed to howl with ancient voices. The team prepared for the climb with meticulous care. Oxygen cylinders were checked, ropes coiled, and tents secured against the unpredictable storms. Arjun felt both awe and dread. Everest was not a mountain to be conquered, it was a force to be respected. He reminded himself that resilience meant bending without breaking, adapting without surrendering. The prayer flags at base camp fluttered like fragile hearts, reminding him that even the smallest thread could carry immense strength, when lifted by the wind. The climb to Camp 1 tested his endurance. The Khumbu icefall was a labyrinth of towering seracs and crevasses, that could swallow a man whole. Each step across the ladders laid over yawning gaps, demanded absolute focus. Arjun's heart pounded, not just from exertion but from the awareness that one misstep could end everything. Yet, he pressed on, whispering his brother's name with each step, as if carrying him along. By the time he reached Camp 1, exhaustion had wrapped around him like a heavy cloak, but beneath it burned a quiet triumph. He realized that grief was not a weight to be discarded, but a companion to be carried carefully, step by step, across the fragile bridges of life. Camp 2 brought storms that lashed the tents with fury. Days of waiting tested the climbers' patience. Some grew restless, others anxious. Arjun found solace in silence, watching the snow swirl outside, reminding himself that recovery was often about waiting, about enduring the storm until the sky cleared. He shared quiet conversations with a Sherpa named Dorhe, who told him, "The mountain is like time, it cannot be rushed. It teaches patience, or it breaks you." Those words stayed with Arjun, echoing in his mind as he lay awake, listening to the wind claw at the canvas. He began to see patience not as weakness, but as strength disguised in stillness. In those long hours, he realized that grief too was a storm, sometimes violent, sometimes quiet, and that healing meant learning to wait, until its fury softened. When the weather finally relented, the team pushed upward, crossing the western Kum, a valley of ice that shimmered under the sun, like a frozen ocean. The beauty was deceptive, the heat reflected off the snow made breathing harder, and every step felt like walking through fire disguised as ice. Arjun marveled at the paradox: the mountain could burn and freeze at once, reminding him that resilience was often born in contradiction. He thought of his brother again, how grief had frozen him, yet how the climb was igniting something new inside. The western Kum became a mirror of his own heart, an expanse where pain and hope coexisted, each step a negotiation between despair and renewal. At Camp 3, perched on the Lhotse face, the climb became brutal. The steep wall of ice demanded strength, Arjun wasn't sure he had. His muscles screamed, his lungs burned, and doubt crept in like a shadow. But then he remembered his brother's laughter, the way he had once said, "You're stronger than you think." That memory became his rope, pulling him upward. By the time he reached the camp, his body was battered, but his spirit had found a new rhythm, one that matched the heartbeat of the mountain. He realized that resilience was not a single act of defiance, but a rhythm, a pulse that carried him forward, even when his body begged to stop. The mountain was teaching him that strength was not about conquering pain, but about moving with it, step by step, until it became part of the climb itself. Camp 4, the death zone, was where courage and resilience were stripped bare. Oxygen was scarce, and every breath felt borrowed. Climbers spoke less, conserving energy, their faces etched with determination and fear. Arjun lay in his tent, staring at the thin fabric that separated him from the vast, merciless night. He thought of recovery, not as a destination, but as a journey. The mountain was teaching him that healing was not about forgetting pain, but about carrying it upward, transforming it into strength. He wrote one last line in his journal: before the summit push, grief is a stone. Courage is the hand that lifts it higher. The words glowed faintly in the dim light of his headlamp, a promise to himself that the climb was more than physical, it was the reshaping of his soul. The final push to the summit began in darkness. Headlamps flickered like stars moving across the ridge. The wind was a predator, clawing at their bodies, but Arjun pressed on, each step a dialogue between despair and hope. The Hillary step loomed ahead, a near vertical rock face that had broken many climbers before him. His hands trembled as he gripped the rope, his body screaming for rest. But he remembered his promise, to discover whether the human heart could endure. With a surge of will, he climbed, inch by inch, until the obstacle was behind him. Every movement felt like a prayer, every breath a fragile offering to the mountain. And then, as dawn broke, Arjun stood on the summit of Mount Everest. The world stretched below him, clouds drifting like rivers of light. Tears blurred his vision, not from the cold but from the realization that he had carried his brother's memory to the highest point on earth. He whispered into the wind, "We made it." In that moment, courage was no longer about reaching the top, resilience was no longer about enduring hardship, and recovery was no longer about healing wounds. They had all become one, a single truth carved into the sky. The summit was not a victory, it was a communion, a place where grief and love stood together, transformed into something eternal. The descent was harder than the climb, as exhaustion and thin air gnawed at his strength. He stumbled often, his vision clouded, his body trembling. Dorhe's steady hand reminded him that no one walked alone on the mountain. At one point, Arjun collapsed onto the ice, his breath shallow, his mind drifting. Dorhe knelt beside him and said, "Stand, brother. The mountain has given you its lesson. Now take it home." Those words jolted him awake. He rose, step by step, until base camp welcomed him back with its fluttering prayer flags, and the warmth of human voices. The descent became a second pilgrimage, not toward glory but toward gratitude. When he finally returned, his body was frail, but his spirit was unbreakable. He had not conquered Everest, he had walked with it, learned from it, and carried its lessons into his soul. The mountain had not erased his grief, but it had reshaped it, turning sorrow into strength, silence into song. He realized that the summit was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new way of living. Everest had carved into him a truth, that resilience is not about standing tall against the storm, but about bending with it, rising again, and carrying forward the memory of those we love. Years later, when Arjun shared his story, he never spoke of glory or records. He spoke of courage, as the choice to keep moving when fear screamed, louder than hope. He spoke of resilience as the art of bending, without breaking. And he spoke of recovery, as the quiet strength of carrying pain upward, until it transformed into light. His journey on Everest was not just a climb, it was a testament to the human spirit, a story of courage, resilience, and recovery that lived on long after the snow had melted from his boots. And whenever he told it, he would pause, look toward the horizon, and whisper his brother's name, as though the mountain still echoed it back. In quiet gatherings, he would describe how the Khumbu icefall had taught him vigilance, how the storms at Camp 2 had taught him patience, how the Western Khum had taught him paradox, and how the death zone had taught him humility. Each stage of the climb was not just geography but philosophy, a lesson carved into ice and stone. He would tell listeners that Everest was not a place to prove strength, but a place to discover it. And in their eyes, he saw the same flicker of wonder that had once lit his own, when he first dreamed of the mountain. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, Arjun would open his old journal, its pages weathered by snow and wind. He would read the lines he had written by firelight and headlamp, and he would smile at the boy who had carried grief like a stone. He knew now that grief was not a burden to be dropped, but a weight to be lifted higher, until it became part of the sky itself. His brother's memory was no longer a hollow inside him, it was a summit he carried everywhere, a peak that rose within his heart. And so, Arjun's Everest was not just the mountain in Nepal. It was every challenge he faced afterward, every sorrow he carried, every hope he nurtured. The climb had taught him that resilience was not a single act, but a rhythm that continued long after the ropes were coiled, and the tents packed away. It was the rhythm of living, of breathing, of remembering, of rising again. Everest had given him its lesson, and he had taken it home. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of resilience.